Hello everyone, welcome back to Just One More Opinion. My name is Charlie, and after reviewing Assassin's Creed Valhalla, the latest installment in the AC franchise, I am ready to rank all 12 AC games from the worst to the best. So, let's get started! Okay guys, for today's ranking, I'm gonna try and do something different. So far, I have ranked the MCU and the DCU movie franchises, as well as Peaky Blinders' 5 seasons, and for those lists, I simply went through each movie or season as they landed on each spot of the list, and I just explained its placing. For the AC games, I'm gonna try something new. I'm gonna go through topics through such as characters, story, locations, etc. And I will be choosing the best 3 games in each topic as well as the worst 3 and give quick reasons as to why. And I'm choosing to do this way because my last episode on Assassin's Creed Valhalla has been the only AC episode in which I give my opinion on the franchise. And in that episode, it was on one particular game. So by doing this, you can know more about how I feel about each entry. I am keeping a list next to me in which I am keeping score, giving some points and taking some points to each game depending on the position, so by the end, I can have a general idea for the ranking, even though I will probably move around 1 or 2 games when I get there. Also, just so you know about my history with Assassin's Creed, I've been a fan since 2012. I was 13 years old when I first played Assassin's Creed 3. I vividly remember watching a trailer for the game, thinking it looked dope, and that at the time I wasn't playing anything else, so why not try out this franchise? And I was hooked from the start. Until then, I had played mostly PS2 games. I only had a couple of PS3 games, and not that good either. So Assassin's Creed 3 was perhaps one of the first video games that turned me into a full gamer. Because after finishing the story of AC3, I went to the store and bought AC1, 2, Brotherhood, and Revelations, which were all super cheap, because I bought them at this second-hand gaming store, which has been closed since then, sadly. And after that, I have played through all the AC main games. I have completed almost all of the DLCs available since Unity. Maybe I skipped Odyssey and some of Origins, but throughout all of the franchise, I tapped into some of these additional extra content. And also, I have not played AC Liberation because I do not own a PS Vita, even though I know there's a main console version since then. So that's why I'm not adding this one to the list. So yeah, to be clear, and for those of you who do not know this, those of you who have not followed the AC game franchise, the 12 main AC games are AC1 from 2007, AC2 2009, AC Brotherhood 2010, AC Revelations 2011, AC3 2012, AC4 Black Flag 2013, AC Rogue and AC Unity both from 2014, AC Syndicate 2015, AC Origins 2017, AC Odyssey 2018, and AC Valhalla 2020. Whew. Okay, with that said, let's dive right in. Starting with the main character, the one you play as. In my opinion, the top 3 protagonists are Ezio Auditore da Firenze from Assassin's Creed 2, Brotherhood and Revelations, Edward Kenway from Black Flag, and Bayek of Siwa from Origins. Here I thought about their charisma, their moral code, and the connection I felt with each character. And these 3 are easily the best for me because, yeah, they just exude this personality. I just felt connected to them. But in the bottom, though, I put Connor Canway, Assassin's Creed 3, Jacob Fry from Syndicate, and Cassandra / Alexios from Odyssey. The latter being quite obvious as to why. There is no personality there, as you literally choose who you want Cassandra or Alexios to be, which is really dumb. Because, anyway. And Jacob was he was really annoying, always trying to make jokes. And Connor, even though I have a soft spot for him, as he was the protagonist of my very first AC experience, was just too serious for a young man, too troubled, and without a great sense of, well, personality either. Which is a shame, because he had something interesting going on with his backstory, and yeah, I want to add an honorable mention here, though, it being Eivor from Valhalla, because he or she was such an upgrade from Odyssey's main character and a return back to normal protagonists, which I fully believe to be crucial for our enjoyment of their journey. And Eivor, yeah, he has a very good personality, sense of honor and loyalty. Yeah, I really enjoyed Eivor from Valhalla. Speaking of which, now let's look at character arc, which is a bit different from the last point, as I am looking at the emotional, intellectual journey each character took throughout their stories. The top picks for me are, once again, Edward and Ezio. The Ezio specifically from Brotherhood, as he gets to fully evolve from what he was in the second game and pave the way for his mentorship in Revelations. And my third choice is Altair ibn Lahad from Assassin's Creed 1. He's a completely different assassin when you get to the end, to the final act, compared to his arrogance and stubbornness he displayed at the start. And with Edward, let me say, it just ties into his connection to the Creed and his personal story, which is intrinsically linked to his relationships, the broken and the born anew, which made for a very compelling, heartfelt finale for an AC game. But the worst three, for me, are Connor's, Cassandra's / Alexios, and Jacob's, just like in the characters section. Because, as I've said, their personalities are so bland and or annoying and or non-existent that even in their personal journeys there are no clear changes in their perspective, I'm afraid. There are slight variations in their views of the Creed or their role in society, but nothing major, unfortunately. Moving on to the main antagonists. Here I looked at how much I enjoyed having these characters as the villains, and if I still remember them well. My top three choices are Charles Lee from Assassin's Creed 3, that rhymed, Crawford Steric from Syndicate, and Al Mualim from Assassin's Creed 1. Those are the ones I enjoyed the most. The ones that, in my opinion, seemed to take on the role of antagonist much better than all the other ones, and they have something to add to the story. I also contemplated adding Valhalla's antagonist, but because it's still very fresh, I decided to leave it out. But let me say that I did enjoy what they did with its villains. My bottom three choices are Unity's Francois Thomas Germain, Odyssey's Aspasia, and Revelation's Prince Hamet. And my main reason for these choices is that I had to look up all of these because I forgot about their names and some even how they looked. That's how unmemorable they were for me. Okay, let's sidetrack to side characters now. And for these, I'm looking mostly at allies, if they added anything to the main story, if they were colorful people or not, and again, if I remember them. The best are Black Flag's characters, without a question, And in Assassin's Creed 2 and Valhalla, we also get some great set of characters. I don't think I really need to explain why I chose these three, do I? Of course, if you don't know, if you haven't played Assassin's Creed Valhalla, then you might not understand why I picked it. So just to clarify, due to the story mechanic of finding allies, building bonds with so many different people from different regions, plus your relationship with your own clan, I just had to add Valhalla to the top of the list because there was so much connection to the side characters, to those stories that I just loved. But the worst three are Assassin's Creed 3, Odyssey, and Assassin's Creed 1. I think Odyssey is pretty straightforward. That game was a game. But to explain Assassin's Creed 1 being so low, for me it was the fact that there are so few female characters and so few permanent allies and such. You have your targets and some Creed assassins allies by your side at points in time, but the interactions are but a few, and for me at least, quite unmemorable as well. And for Assassin's Creed 3, you do have Achilles Davenport as a mentor, who is great, and some fun historical figures who were alright in their existence in the story, but apart from that, not one of the best in the franchise, I'm afraid. Moving on to the Assassin v Templar element of each Assassin's Creed game, and granted that for the past 3 installments it hasn't been exactly Assassins and Templars, and that will count massively, because all these games are supposedly Assassin's Creed, thus putting Origins and Odyssey in the bottom 3, without a question, plus Assassin's Creed Revelations, which had an easily forgettable Templar story, in my opinion. I didn't really, while I was doing this ranking and thinking about each game, I just couldn't really remember the Assassin v Templar story of Revelations, I'm afraid. And for my top 3 picks, I'll have to go with Assassin's Creed 2 being the very best. Syndicate was actually alright in that regard for me, because it still focused heavily on this war, and after Syndicate, with Origins, Odyssey, Valhalla, kind of drifted away from that. So Syndicate was actually pretty good. And Assassin's Creed 3, which might be an unpopular opinion for this topic, but I kind of enjoyed how Connor was being familiarized with the Assassins and the Templars, the stuff with his dad, Atham, who was an active Templar, with a surprisingly fleshed out set of morals and ideals. And I really enjoyed moving on through each sequence, hunting down the Templars and seeing how Connor interacted with each, as they usually presented some sort of intellectual dilemma for the overall story and some philosophical conflicts for Connor too. Maybe I'm biased because it was my first Assassin's Creed game that I played, but there you go. Now, let's talk about the actual main story, with everything taken into consideration, how the actual core plot was from the beginning to end, how it felt to me. And for my top 3, I have to go with Assassin's Creed 1, Assassin's Creed 2, and Assassin's Creed Origins. I think the stories of each game were written beautifully, really well crafted, and even though I might not actively want to replay these games, I still appreciate how great of a story they had. And in my bottom 3, we have Odyssey, Rogue, and Brotherhood. Odyssey, well, it's Odyssey. There's not much I can say about that. With Rogue, even though I kind of enjoyed playing as a Templar and looking at the Creed through a different lens, the story was too short. The shortest, I believe, and that's why it's in my bottom 3. And with Brotherhood, it felt too much of a continuation of Assassin's Creed 2, so much so that I sometimes forget which bits and pieces were from Assassin's Creed 2 or Brotherhood. I can only remember Cesare Borgia being introduced as this awful, spoiled little brat in Brotherhood, and yeah, it's not particularly a story that I want to replay, that I want to revisit anytime soon. Moving on to the modern day, Assassin's Creed has always been this tight connection between the past Assassin v Templar War and the current modern day, much more hidden conflict between those two factions. And the use of the Animus machines as a way to explore the memories of these past characters has always intrigued me so much. Maybe it's even the singular reason as to why I fell in love with Assassin's Creed in the first place. It's such a great concept, and our 21st century protagonists were vital in giving us either a good or a bad modern day arc. That's why my bottom three are Black Flag, Unity, and Rogue, with the dishonorable mention of Syndicate, because we played as this floating head, like in first person, without a voice, and quite frankly without a purpose. And okay, yeah, these games were the link between the Desmond Miles-led modern day and the Layla Hassan story of Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla, but what a disappointing link that was. Assassin's Creed 1, Assassin's Creed 2, and Valhalla had a much more enticing modern day story. In my opinion, that's why they're in my top 3. And if you haven't played Valhalla yet and you're thinking about it, honestly do it. The modern day stuff is much better than in Origins and Odyssey, in my opinion, and send me an email or a message on Twitter and Instagram when you're done with the game, because I believe it to be pretty divisive amongst fans, but I quite like the boldness they displayed in that finale. So yeah, to those of you who have played it already, let me know what you thought too, because I'm sure we can either agree or disagree, because yeah, it was really controversial. Let's move on to the world of the game, its locations. One of the best parts about AC games is exploring new cities and countries set in different time periods and cultures. It's really mind-blowing and educational. I learned so much about history through Assassin's Creed, most of it because of the context, of course, but also because of the places we visit in the game. And I looked at the list of the locations, the main locations, and I thought about vibrancy, color, and cultural importance. So in my top 3, I put Assassin's Creed 2, Black Flag, and Odyssey. Yeah, actually. The latter because there were so many different places and it was so colorful, like I said. And the other two were just phenomenal. I don't think there's much explaining needed there. Now for the bottom 3, again, I was mostly thinking about how they don't have much color, how bland and repetitive they seemed. So I put Assassin's Creed Revelations, Rogue, and AC1, which might be a somewhat unpopular opinion, but yeah, that's just how I feel, guys. That's just one more opinion, yeah? But yeah, I think the world was very much, was a bit gray, too gray, you know, too of a grayish color around it. That's why AC1 is in my bottom 3. Moving on to the historical context, which is slightly different from this last section, as the real events of each game partially define the interest in said game. For my top 3, I chose, again, Assassin's Creed 2, because we are living in the Renaissance, Assassin's Creed 3 in the American Revolution, and Origins, Reign of Ptolemy in ancient Egypt. I just enjoyed the settings of these 3 games. They're the ones where I learned the most and was most in awe of the historical context. Honestly, most games left me amazed by the time periods and the stories it had ingrained in them, but Rogue's 7 Years' War Odyssey's Peloponnesian War and Revelation's consequences of the Ottoman-Byzantine War in Constantinople kind of disappointed me. I had no real interest in the historical context of these games. I don't really know why. It just didn't appeal to me that much, I'm afraid. And like I said, it's about remembering the stories and the context. I just don't remember those as well. Now for exploration. And by exploration, I mean how you, the player, can interact with the world. How, if you have the liberty to explore, to choose your path, and the amount of side activities we have at our disposal as well. So in that regard, I have to give it to the last 3 games, Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla, because they really drove me to explore every corner of the world, while Assassin's Creed 1, Assassin's Creed 3, and Assassin's Creed Rogue just didn't really attract me in that way. I didn't feel compelled to go here and go there and find out more about the world. It just didn't do it for me, which is really sad, but that's just how it is. It is what it is. Let's move on to gameplay. And here I'm thinking about how the controls feel, how good the overall gameplay is as an action-adventure game, and yeah, in my opinion, AC2, AC3, and Valhalla were the ones I had most fun with. The combat was enticing, sometimes challenging, sometimes relaxing, and always really damn cool. And on the other hand, we have Syndicate, which had a combat gameplay really freaking weird, and Origins and Odyssey with a more RPG-focused method of gameplay that I didn't really enjoy for Assassin's Creed. And with Valhalla there was a clear upgrade, and that's why it's even one of my favorites and not in the bottom 3. But yeah, I just don't think, I will say this in a bit because I will tackle those topics, but Assassin's Creed shouldn't be a franchise about RPG gameplay. It shouldn't be an RPG game franchise, and that's why I didn't really enjoy that implementation in Origins and Odyssey, and a bit still, of course, in Valhalla. But looking more specifically now into the stealth and the parkour gameplay, which is vital, which is vintage to the Assassin's Creed franchise. And there are clear differences between the games. The bottom 3 are the same as before, Syndicate, Origins, and Odyssey, because there was a downgrade in terms of what we had, while the Assassin's Creed 2 and Revelation stealth and parkour mechanics are much more my liking. But you know what? And this might be a bit of an unpopular opinion, I have to give it to Unity for reinventing the parkour system. The mechanics were just so smooth and fun. I wish that they had kept that same engine for the other games that came after, because that's one of the few positives of Assassin's Creed Unity. I really enjoyed the parkour, like the traversal, the diagonal climbing, and yeah, I thought that was really great, and I'm so disappointed that they didn't develop that for Assassin's Creed Syndicate and these last 3 games. Hopefully, for the next installments, they will try and go back and see what they can learn about Unity, because of course there's a lot of problems, but I think in this case, that was one of the better things. One of the best things about Unity. In terms of gear and weapons, the whole customization aspect of Assassin's Creed that has been wildly different with each entry, I have 3 different aspects to analyze. The look of the assassin outfit, the one you use most of the time, the range of weapons we can use, and the freedom we have with playing with both weapons and clothing. like choosing what we can wear on our head, torso, blah blah blah, etc. And Assassin's Creed 1, Rogue, and Syndicate add a lack thereof in those choices for different reasons. In Assassin's Creed 1, there was not a lot of customization options, in my opinion. Maybe I forgot about those, or I didn't really look that hard, but yeah. The costume is cool. Altair's robes are cool, yes. But apart from that, there's not really much customization options available. In Assassin's Creed Rogue, we had a cool weapon with the air rifle, but not much else, I would say. Maybe, yeah. And in Syndicate, while the outfits were cool, they were interesting, yes, we only had 3 different types of weapons, which didn't allow for many combat options. And yeah, like I said, the combat was really weird, so combine that with 3 choices and there's not much else we can do. The best three games in this regard are Assassin's Creed 2. The outfit just looks dope and the weapons are simple but awesome to play with. Black Flag, because again, Edward's outfit also looks dope as hell, and the pirate weapons gave it a different, refreshing flair to Assassin's Creed. And once again, Unity, because the customization was so fleshed out and broad. And maybe one could argue that there was too much to choose from, and yeah, maybe that was true. But having the ability to dye our clothing was a much needed feature that we haven't seen for a while, and it has been now more than 6 years since Unity. Well, they did add that to Syndicate, but yeah, like we haven't seen this feature for a while, and it's such a nice feature to have, I would say, just to dye our robes and clothing and etc. the color we like, so we can perhaps feel more like an assassin, because sometimes the color schemes that they have in some gear are just too colorful. And colorful is an adjective I've used in a positive way to describe the world, yes, but we're an assassin. We're assassins. We should blend in, not have gold in our gear. Anyway, let's move on to something more specific. The acting. Specifically for the main character, because we spend more time with them. And in Syndicate, Unity, and Odyssey, the acting was average, sometimes pretty bad, even. I felt no real connection with the characters, and some of the reasons relied on the actors not giving powerful portrayals of these heroic characters, which is never something we wish to have in a video game where we spend dozens and dozens of hours with this one person. And the real highlights of Assassin's Creed happen in Revelations, with Roger Craig Smith's last performance as Ezio, in Black Flag, with Matt Ryan's Edward Kenway, and in Origins, with Abubakar Salim's portrayal of Bayek, which might be the very best of them all. The connection I felt with each of these protagonists was born out of their emotional presence, which was created in part by the writing, yes, and in part by the beautiful acting they were given. It was truly a gift. Next up, and we're almost done, the franchise implications of each game, their importance in the overarching story of Assassin's Creed. Some games have fantastic consequences for the future of the world, of this universe, and others feel more like filler games, with not a lot to add to the story of the franchise. Assassin's Creed 2, Assassin's Creed 3, and Assassin's Creed Valhalla not only left a great mark in the future of the modern day story, but for the entire AC lore. These 3 games expanded on the philosophies and the origins of the Creed, and other more mystical aspects of these games, and all of them left me speechless at some point in time during my playthroughs. And that's really what I want, to react, to have an actual truthful reaction when I'm playing a game. And those 3 games just gave me that. On the other hand, Rogue, Unity, and Syndicate left me wanting more of the Assassin v Templar story, more about what is going on in the present day, more about the lore that we so much love about the franchise. And the lack of a good modern day story was disappointing and frustrating, and thus a crucial factor of these 3 games being so low on this particular list. But the main story was also very inconsequential for the future of Assassin's Creed, in my opinion. That's just... And yeah, I want to play a game and feel like this is gonna lead somewhere in the future, or this connects to this. Of course, there are always some little connections here and there, but yeah, it was really disappointing in Rogue, Unity, and Syndicate, I'm afraid. And lastly, before I present the actual ranking of all 12 games, let's look at the technicalities, meaning the graphics, but also the glitches, those nasty bugs. Origins, Odyssey, and Black Flag had the best graphics, in my opinion, and not many bugs, which did not happen in Valhalla and Unity, games that have beautiful visuals, but a whole lot of glitches, unfortunately. And Assassin's Creed 1, although it didn't glitch that much, like I said before, it had average-looking graphics, was very grey, nothing too impressive. Of course, it was a 2007 game. Of course, I know that. I have that into consideration, yes. But compared to the rest of the franchise, it was one of the worst ones in this particular regard. And okay, those were all 16 aspects that I took into consideration. I'm gonna have a quick break now, and I'll be back with a list of all 12 Assassin's Creed games, ranked based on my opinion, and yeah, be right back. Alright guys, let's go right into it. At number 12, of course, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It doesn't feel like an Assassin's Creed game. The existence of choices gave the protagonists no real personality, and going that far back to 400 BC was too much of a stretch for me, considering Assassin's Creed Origins was believed to be the biggest jump back in time to 40 BC, and then we went 3 centuries back even further, which felt odd. At number 11, Assassin's Creed Rogue. Exploring the life of an assassin turned Templar was an interesting twist, yes, but the story wasn't that enticing or exciting. Shay Patrick Cormac wasn't that interesting of a protagonist as well, and the game felt like the clear opposite of Black Flag, and at the same time, quite similar. At number 10, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. The only reason why I have the third AC game so low is because I don't feel like revisiting this game that often. The story wasn't that expansive for me after we got the brilliant Assassin's Creed 2, plus the Brotherhood side of it should have been more forced on the player, as I didn't really feel the need to use the Assassin Allies feature. And maybe yes, this is an unpopular placing, but that's my opinion, duh. At number 9, Assassin's Creed Syndicate. I actually quite enjoyed my first playthrough of Syndicate because it felt quite different, something new, while still focusing on the Assassin Templar War that I love so much. But after a few years, I started seeing the faults in it, the combat, the character of Jacob, the overall feel of the gameplay. It actually felt further away from the vintage games than, let's say, Valhalla, which happens 1,000 years before the events of Syndicate, and it's still much closer to the identity of Assassin's Creed. And that's really unfortunate. At number 8, Assassin's Creed 1. The original game that paved the way for all these other games and other projects, and I think AC1 was great at establishing what the franchise should feel like, what it is all about. But it's not one of the games that I want to replay the most. Maybe it's because it's the oldest game, and the evolution in the industry has shown us how much a game can do nowadays. But nevertheless, AC1 was a great beginning for this franchise, my favorite game franchise, and I gotta give it to the game, to the developers, but it's not a game that I particularly want to revisit anytime soon. At number 7, Assassin's Creed Unity, which might feel like a sin, putting it above Assassin's Creed 1. And for me, Unity was great at showing what an Assassin's Creed next-gen title could look and feel like, which is so sad to know that what worked about this game wasn't developed further, like I said before, simply because of the hate it received regarding the bugs and the unimpressive protagonist. But, in my opinion, the city of Paris, the mechanics of the parkour, they were just breathtaking, and I want the graphics of Unity to be a priority for future games, because even though it was a buggy game, yes, no doubt about that, that visual design of characters and the world was quite beautiful. At number 6, Assassin's Creed Revelations. For me, what worked about this game, was the finality of Ezio's journey. How mature this character that we had known since he was 17 in Assassin's Creed 2, how he had become. Even though the main story in Constantinople wasn't really memorable, the connection to Ezio and his connection to Altair's last years was such a pivotal part and the reason as to why Revelations is this high in my ranking. I think it really finalized Ezio and Altair's stories just so damn well. At number 5, Assassin's Creed 3. Okay guys, this is an unpopular opinion of the highest standard, I know, but understand this. Assassin's Creed 3 was the first game I played of the franchise. It was what led me to play the first 4 games and follow the rest of the franchise, and perhaps what turned me into an avid gamer, actually. The character of Connor and the story might not be perfect, or even excellent, or even great, but the relationship between Connor and his father was really one of the best bits about AC3, and that final scene between them is one of the few moments in the franchise that makes me tear up. Yeah. At number 4, Assassin's Creed Origins, the clear reinvention of the franchise, the first 2-year gap between installments since Assassin's Creed 2, and I get why they did it. The franchise turned into more of an RPG game formula, which is upsetting, but Bayek's personal story and the journey of the whole game in relation to the rest of the franchise was quite an interesting turn. And it set up some stuff that we already knew, but it also planted the seeds for future games, I hope, maybe. And of course, I cannot stress this enough. Bayek of Siwa is an unbelievably good character, so well crafted, and you almost immediately fall in love with him from the very start. It's just such a powerful journey of him, and yeah, I love it. At number 3, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Maybe I'm being biased because it was the last game I've played, the last the latest game in the franchise, but I quite enjoyed what they did with Valhalla. Eivor is another great protagonist. Their moral code is clearly set and displayed. Their personality is something I think we can all relate to. And the franchise implications were pretty shocking and something I'm still wrapping my mind around. I really enjoyed playing the game, even if it was too long, and I'm glad that it was so much, but so much of an upgrade since Odyssey. At number 2, Assassin's Creed 2. Most people put the second AC game in first place, and for good reasons, but this is my list, of course. And although I love Ezio, although I love this game, and I love the world building of this game, I just connected more to my top choice, which is Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag at number 1. It was the first time there was a clear drift away from what made AC, but putting us in the shoes of a pirate who comes into contact with the assassins and learns from them, but he's still very much of a pirate. That idea, like drifting away, it just didn't really let me down, which might be a bit hypocritical because in the last 3 games there was no there was no focus on being an assassin per se, but here, I don't know, I was actually more in love with the story of Edward Kenway because of that, because of how he came into contact with the assassins and wasn't one from the beginning. Because of that, and not despite of it. His relationships are what made Edward, and seeing the relationships evolve in time, and how sometimes they ended and changed and became, it was such a beautiful journey. And that last cinematic scene is another tear-jerking moment for me. And for those reasons and many more, Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag comes in at number 1. Guys, that was it. All 12 Assassin's Creed games ranked based on my opinion. This was another long episode because I really wanted to dive deep into each section of these games, but I want to hear from you now. Not only your lists, but also what you thought about this episode. Did you enjoy the structure I used, or would you rather have me go through the list one by one and explain their placing instead and in greater depth? I don't mind either way, honestly, but I decided to do this episode like this to vary and experiment, see what works for me and you. So please, I'd love some feedback on this episode and the rest. The links to my social media accounts and email are on the description of the podcast, so hit me up when and if you can. I would love to hear from you and know my audience better in a more personal way. With that said, goodbye my friends. This has been just one more opinion. I have been Charlie and you have been phenomenal. Take care.